Hello and welcome to Cold Takes. Before we get started on my first video in months, which I apologize for, I wanted to get started with a little bit of background information. Firstly, I'm a college student currently, and that'll be my excuse for not uploading a single video in the entire NHL regular season this year. But now that the summer is coming, I wanted to get back in the swing of making videos, and I figured I'd start with the NFL, which I can just flat out say isn't my area of expertise, but I'm incredibly passionate about it and just wanted to make this video. For a few seasons, just on my own time, I started reading scouting reports of every player before the draft and just giving my opinion on a scale of, it used to be 1 to 5, but now it's 1 to 15. I figured I could use this data to make a video just to get back in the swing of things. So, without further ado, let us begin. Before I start ranking each team's draft class, I wanted to go over the format of the slides that I will be showing. Of course, at the top you'll have the rank, the team name, and the logo. Below that is the average pick and then the ranking of that, meaning that if a team picked both 50 and 100, the average would be 75. And then below that is the average grade of the prospect out of 15, and yet again, next to it is where it ranks team by team. Following that, we have the number of gem prospects, which are just the prospects that I identified personally as people that I really like as prospects. And then finally, we have the total value of picks, meaning the sum of the 1 through 15 ratings to each prospect. And then yet again, you have the ranking next to it. And then finally, you just have the total number of picks made by that team this year. Starting off in last place is the Minnesota Vikings, who only had 4 draft picks to make this year. That is kind of the big reason why they're down here, but I didn't really love any of the players they picked with those 4 selections either. They did make 2 10 out of 15s, which is my minimum for making a gem if I like their player page, but I didn't like theirs. So, coming in last is the Minnesota Vikings. Coming up next is the Denver Broncos, who I can actually highlight some of the picks that I really liked. First off, in the first round was the cornerback Barron, who I just liked. I liked his versatility, and I think he'll do well in that defense. Pick 101 was Jones, and another D-end I liked. Neither of them I really viewed as having elite potential, but both of them I feel are quality NFL starters for their career. So I liked this class. There just wasn't much other than these 2 players, in my opinion. Following up the Broncos, we have the Miami Dolphins at 30, who had a better class and had a few more players, but same kind of overall issue with Denver, where I don't think anybody they picked has a bigger chance than being a quality starter rather than any gems. I don't think they really got their big pieces in this draft. However, I will say that Quinn Ewers was my second favorite quarterback in this draft, which I guess tells you where I view Sanders. But anyways, I've gone in the wrong order here a bit. I do like the D-tackle, Kenneth Grant, but I do kind of view him as second fiddle to the other Michigan D-tackle who went in the beginning of the first round. And then another mid-round pick flyer like Ewers was Gordon, who, yet again, I view him as a NFL starting running back, but I don't really view him as the next Saquon. I really think there was only 1 or 2 of those in this draft. And up next, we have the Houston Texans, and it's the first case where a 9 is considered a gem, and that is because there were some 9s who athletically, they may not have been, like, guaranteed NFL starters, but I really liked them, so I gave them a 9 and gave them that gem as, this isn't as likely. And then vice versa also happened with 2 players from Minnesota, who they were 10s, but they didn't receive the gem because they did have that athletic talent, but I just didn't see it projecting to the NFL level. But in the first round, they picked one of those 10 players who didn't end up being a gem, and it was a wide receiver in Higgins, and then the 2 picks that I liked were other offensive skill positions in wide receiver again in Knoll and Marks, running back, who, yet again, 10 and 9, I don't have them being elite players, but I don't have them being bad either. I didn't really agree with the Texans' philosophy in this draft. They seemed to go very heavy into wide receivers and with high picks. And I feel like that wide receiver room is pretty filled out already depth wise. I don't see these picks working out unless one of them actually becomes an elite player to kind of take work away from Collins. And I really don't see someone doing that from this class. So, hey, prove me wrong, Texans, but that's why they're down here. At 28, we have the Arizona Cardinals, who got, in my opinion, a potential massive steal in Will Johnson. I know people were really scared about him because of injuries, and I believe it was his knee, but I mean, how many times does a player have an injury that lowers their draft stock and it doesn't really affect them? I feel like we're a little scared of injuries coming from college if they're not career threatening. And then they got the D tackle, Walter Nolan, in an incredibly stacked D tackle class. So, I mean, they got two players. This is kind of the beginning of, you might start seeing some players where I really like them. I think they have the opportunity to be elite or Pro Bowlers at the very least. And they've got two guys who I really see that potential in. Who knows if they get there, but they got some guys that I really like in Nolan and Johnson. First, we have Dallas, who actually incredibly surprised me by picking O-line in the first round rather than going skill position because Jerry gonna Jerry. But I actually really liked the guard they picked. He was a little early taken, but I don't care about that. I just care about bringing in talent, and I think they did with him. Then they got a D-end later who I had as a 10 who was not a gem either. And then I also think they got a real solid corner in Revel Jr. I just really liked his game, and I really like the fit here. Next, we have one of the teams that made the mistake of going quarterback this year. We have the Saints, who I really only liked their middle linebacker in 112. Really not a very impressive draft class for me. I wasn't big on Show. I wasn't big on Banks Jr. Most of the picks that they made were guys that I just didn't really love, so they're down here, but they picked some kind of high-value prospects no matter what, so they had a very high average for most of their guys, so their average is high, so I like them as far as getting depth out of this draft, but not much more than that. Maybe they'll get some good special teamers here, some guys who fill good roster spots, but I don't see a lot of talent in this draft class really leading to wins. I just view a lot of guys that'll help you not lose. I feel like I could just copy and paste the audio file I clipped for the Saints and just put it back here with the Rams and just replace the name Stewart, but I really have the same opinions about this class. Yet again, bunch of guys who were in the 6 to 8 range for me, so they had a lot of guys that are solid prospects, but not amazing ones in my opinion. I liked Stewart at pick 90, but not an overwhelming class, just a class that'll really help the bottom of the depth chart get stronger. San Fran might be the hardest team's draft class to rank in this entire draft, and honestly, I don't agree with where I put them. It's just the only place that their math fits with the average grades of prospects. But really the issue here is if you take their first 100 picks, I think they came out like gangbusters, and all the positions of need that they lost in this offseason, I guess not all, but a lot of them were filled by starting caliber players. However, the next 8 picks are very underwhelming. So I really don't see much value past the first 100 picks for them, but their first 100, I think they knocked out of the park. So this draft, if I'm wrong about the first half, then this draft just plummets down. If I'm wrong about the second half, then this just plummets up in the future in hindsight, and we'll find out where this draft actually belongs later, but this is where I have it, and I'm putting the caveat that I don't necessarily agree with them being the 24th draft class. At 23, we have the Indianapolis Colts, who, as an Ohio State student, I should not like their first-round pick, but honestly, I do. I think it's a great fit. Obviously, it's a great position need. I mean, and they got a great player who is better than Loveland, and I don't know what Chicago's doing other than scheme fit, but we'll get to them later. Speaking of Ohio State, they took D-end in the round after that, who I had as a 10 but not a gem. I really was not very high on many Ohio State players in this class, which hopefully accounts to me not having bias or me adjusting too much based on that bias. But whatever. I really liked Henderson, but other than that, I didn't really see many elite players at the next level. Then they took a corner with the 80th pick, who I liked yet again. I think he's a starting caliber player. Next, we have the Lions at 22, who their average grade wasn't that great, but they came away with some gems, especially early. They had 2 10 gems in Williams and Lovett late. And Ratledge was one of those 9s who I gave a gem just because I really liked him. And they had a lot of kind of higher draft picks that weren't gems in the middle. So that's why they're a little higher, even though their math doesn't really fit. They're kind of the opposite of San Fran. The Bucs had a bit of a weird draft class, but not in necessarily a bad way, as they only drafted 3 positions with 6 picks. They drafted 2 receivers, 2 corners, and 2 defensive ends. I really liked the Egbuka pick, and honestly, he's a guy you should probably be looking at in fantasy next year, because both of the receivers above him have reasons of why they might have just a drop-off campaign next year, with Evans with age and Godwin with his injuries of the past year. And then I really liked Parrish. Egbuka, I tend to not love the draft profiles of players who every year somebody else beat them on the depth chart. And it's kind of hard saying that with Ohio State and the elite receivers they've had. But still, he was a wide receiver 2 his entire career. So that's why he's an 11, and I don't have him as highly rated as other people. And maybe that's just me being too hard on Ohio State players, but I don't know. Jeremiah Smith as a freshman is already a better prospect than him. Just entering this year if he could enter the draft. So, I don't know. Kind of makes me slanted on Egbuka a bit. The Patriots had an amazing pick in Henderson. Like I said earlier, I didn't love this draft class. Really, the only running backs that I thought, had potential to be like really, really valuable players were Genty, Scadaboo, and Henderson. And here's one of those running backs. It's a little bit more of a running back heavy league as opposed to the past 3 years have been in draft positioning, but I mean, I think he still fell. I think he's an amazing player, and he definitely should have went before Judkins with his pass protection. Then also, I have not included kickers or punters or any special teams players in my gems that I've put on these lists. But they did take a kicker that I liked late, who I had at an 11 out of 15. Finally, breaking into the top 20, we have the Washington Commanders, who I really didn't love their draft, and honestly, if their average grade of prospect wasn't high, they would not be in the top 20. They only made 5 picks. Their draft class looks a lot like Minnesota, but their average grade of prospect was way too high to not have them in the top 20. So, yet again, we have an opposite San Fran where they might be highly rated, and this class might not look great in the next few years, but hey, I could be wrong, and they could have come out with 5 role players who all have a good spot on the roster, and who knows, maybe there's a gem or 2 in there. You never know with draft analysis, but I don't love this draft, and it shouldn't be this high, but it is. Next, just because this is how the league works, we have the probable future Super Bowl champion, the Kansas City Chiefs, who took Ohio State tackle Simmons in the first round, and a cornerback I like in the later rounds, and had a very high-ranked class without many elite players in it. But I liked their picks. I think they picked some good depth players, and, I mean, that's all you can ask when you're drafting this late. And at 17, wish it was 13, would be the Buffalo Bills, who picked 30, picked a corner in Harrison, who I liked, and then yet again, just like the Chiefs, picked a lot of players with high grades, but no, like, elite prospects. So, kind of rinse and repeat what I said for the last team here again. Good class, good depth, all you can ask for when you're drafting late. Here with Baltimore, we have a very similar situation to with San Fran again, where every pick was either the best possible pick or the worst. They didn't have a single player other than their last round pick with in between an 8 or a 10. So they really just picked low or picked high. They got the steal in the draft, in my opinion, in Malachi Starks. I had him as a top 5 player in this draft and figured he would fall if he made it past Carolina. And he did. And wow, do I think they got an elite player in him. And Mike Green, first round edge rusher, drafted out of the first round. I mean, gotta love that. Corner in Cone, who I like, and then they also drafted a kicker who I didn't list here just because, like I said, with New England, I just didn't put them into the gems here. At 15, we have the Eagles, who drafted a lot of solid, good players who are probably going to be NFL starters in their careers, but not a lot of elite players that I loved. I was down on Campbell. I didn't love him. I had him as a 10 that was not a gem. That has potential to be very wrong, but hey, we'll see. They drafted a safety who I had as a gem, and then they drafted Hinton and Powell Ryland, who I both liked as depth options in this draft, and another tackle and another D-end. So I liked the class. I think they got a lot of starters in it. And, I mean, it's Philly, so, I mean, they'll find some guys in this class that I didn't like, and they'll turn into Pro Bowlers for no reason. Next, we have the Seahawks, who drafted a safety and an Imanwari, who I liked. I liked the Zabel, the first-round O-lineman, who honestly I have no idea what position he's going to play. He played all 3 in college, I think. Drafted a tight end that was all right. Drafted Milroe, who was a quarterback that I had that was a 10 but not a gem. And then they drafted a tight end fullback and a running back who I both had at 9s. They got a kind of like the last team. They got a lot of guys who can fill out positions for them. Very successful draft, but I wouldn't go saying it was an elite class. Up next, we have Aaron Rodgers' retirement home in the Pittsburgh Steelers, who finally actually did a smart draft class after years and years of terrible offensive line picks and development in Kenny Pickett. They drafted Harmon instead of reaching for a quarterback in round 1, which I was not expecting from Tomlin and Kahn. And they drafted Will Howard, who, I mean, I think he has a better chance to be a starting caliber quarterback than a lot of quarterbacks in this class, but that's really not saying much considering how weak of a class this is. And they drafted a running back who was all right. They drafted another Ohio State D-end in Sawyer, who made a lot of splash plays, but wasn't very consistent. So I don't love him as a prospect, but I could see him being very successful, especially with Watt lighting up on the other side. Following the Steelers, we have a team that I'm surprised didn't use college football ratings to draft, was the Jets, who I actually liked their first round. I liked going tackle. I like Membu. I thought he was one of, if not the best O-lineman in this draft. I liked the corner they got later in Thomas. I liked the wide receiver they got in Smith. And their last pick, Barron, the D-end, I also liked. Other than Thomas and Membu, no real gems there, but had a lot of 9s in this class, which I'm surprised by because I don't have the most faith in this team. However, it should be stated that this team did fall very far from their average draft pick and the actual return of what those draft picks became, in my opinion. It really hurt their ranking. As you see, some of the next teams have a higher average grade of prospect than the Jets, but they didn't fall. In fact, they rose or stayed the same. So that did kind of bias my rankings a little bit. If you're just going off of the average grade, the Jets would be like about 4 spots higher. But if you're also just going off of average grade in general, then the Vikings would be at like 20 or something. Up next, we have my team, the Chargers, who I wasn't the most supportive of their first-round pick. I really didn't feel like we needed a running back, and I really didn't specifically want this one. I think he's a great fit for the scheme. I think he's a great fit for how we run the ball, but he's pretty much just a Najee clone who we just signed, so I don't know. Then everybody else, like I've said with other teams, it was a bunch of high players who weren't tens or gems. So they got Leonard, the D end, and they got a corner I liked in Bridges with their last pick, who I see a lot of potential in him. The D back group from last year's class just went above and beyond. So there's history of RGM finding some DNs late. And if that happens again in this class, then I'm all for it. Because we need to improve our secondary, and I really like Bridges. Now we finally get to the top 10 with Jacksonville, who took maybe the best player in the draft, definitely a top 3 talent in Travis Hunter. They got a guard tackle who I really like in Milam. They got a running back who we'll see if he ever gets time with ETN and Bigsby in that backfield, but I like him and I like what he can do at this next level. Some of their later picks also were very highly ranked, but not tens or elite players, so I really only see the one elite player in this class in Hunter, but boy, is Hunter going to be worth it. No one else could work in this class, and Jacksonville would still leave it happy. But that being said, I think there's 2 other guys who could have some careers here. Next, we have the Bengals, who pretty much hit or miss on every pick. They didn't really get any players who I view as average, other than their last pick in Brooks, the running back. I had him at an 8. But Carter, Knight Jr., and Shamar Stewart are all players that I see having long NFL careers and doing a lot at their level. And all those guys are defensive, so it's a good thing that they hit on that side of the ball because they've got offense figured out, and boy, do they not have defense figured out. At 8, we have the team with the first overall pick in the Tennessee Titans, who drafted Cam Ward, and obviously he's a great player. We'll see what he can do at this next level. And then in the next 4 picks, they picked 2 gems and another 10 that I liked that wasn't a gem. In the rusher in Oladejo and the safety in Winston Jr. And then Helm, the tight end, was the one who was not a gem, but I had him at a 10. I like his floor, I just don't love his ceiling, so I didn't want to give him a gem. Next up, we have Green Bay, and while I don't have Golden highly rated, I do love this pick. With Green Bay, I mean, everyone said it, they've needed to go wide receiver for how many years? I have him as an 11, but I really believe in him specifically here. I think he was a guy who needed to go to the right place to succeed, and he did. So post-draft, he's probably a 12 or 13, but pre-draft, I was just drafting the prospect, just analyzing the prospect, and so he's an 11 out of 15, but in Green Bay, I really like him. Another guy in fantasy football, if you play it, who I think you should go after. And then they had Belton and Williams and Brinson as the other gems. Williams being my favorite, but odds are he's not going to get much playing time in this Packers wide receiver room, which is incredibly deep, and obviously had Golden added to it too. So for Packers wide receivers, look out, your workload's going to be less, but for Packers in general, Packers fans, the team, I think you're going to have a good season. At 6, we have Chicago, who took maybe the most surprising pick at the draft in drafting Loveland over Warren. And I don't know why in the world you would do that other than position fit and scheme fit and, the Detroit-Michigan connection with their new coach. But they got who I think might honestly be the best receiver in this class, depending on if you consider Hunter a receiver or a corner or something in between. But I really liked Burden as a prospect, and I really think he'll do well in Chicago, especially with Caleb Williams throwing him the ball. Then they got a D-tackle in Turner, who I liked, and a corner in Frazier, who was a 9, but a gem. And overall, I like this draft class. Loveland is a weird pick, but I'm not saying it's a bad pick. I just wouldn't have made it. I would have made something different. But just because something is conventional wisdom doesn't mean that it's true and it's right, and that going off the beaten path isn't the right decision sometimes. So hey, prove me wrong, Chicago. Prove me wrong, Loveland. Good luck. Cracking into the top 5, we have the team that picked Ashton Jeanty, which, I mean, come on, that makes the draft worth it in itself. He's the only player in this class that I had as a 15 out of 15, meaning that if this guy doesn't succeed, then I have no idea what I'm doing. Which I'm glad that I said that this isn't my area of expertise at the beginning of this video, because that's hockey. But they took a wide receiver who was a gem, or not a gem, but a 9. They took a corner in Porter that I liked, took a guard in Grant that I liked, took another wide receiver who was a gem, but a 9 for me. And then, honestly, they took maybe my favorite late-round steal in the entire draft was J.J. Pegues. I'm apologizing the pronunciation if I'm wrong. But he was a D-tackle who also played fullback, and I had him as a highly ranked D-tackle prospect, but an elite fullback prospect as well. I thought that the value of having one guy to be your fullback and also, I don't know, DT5 on the depth chart is incredibly valuable because it allows you to hold an extra corner, hold an extra quarterback, have an extra wide receiver, have an extra anything. It gives you roster flexibility, and I really liked that. And I just really liked him in general. I really wanted the Chargers to draft him, but they didn't, and he went to their rival. So next we have the Giants, who, even though they picked a dart, who I don't love that pick. I don't love the strategy of that pick with next year's class so good in quarterbacks. Kind of just a save-the-job move, but every other pick I really liked. I really liked Abdul Carter, obviously. I mean, how do you screw that pick up? I really liked Scatabo, who is the only other running back in this class that I see as having any sort of competition for Rookie of the Year with Jeanty. If it goes to a running back, I don't predict that happening. He's just the only guy I could see having a season to compete with Jeanty. And then they also took a guard right tackle, not sure which, in Mbao, and he was a 9 gem. Next, we have the Browns, who, I mean, if you're looking at ESPN and everything, you might be questioning some of the decisions they made and why they took 2 quarterbacks or anything like that. But if you just look at the players they brought in, I really, really like their draft. Mason Graham I had as the best D-tackle. Linebacker, great pick. Judkins, I honestly didn't love that pick. I thought there were better running backs available at that time. Henderson was available, and I would have picked him, but people really debate that. And I really like the Dylan Sampson pick. I think he's the better running back of the 2 between Judkins, and I think he'll probably get more work next year than Judkins will. Or maybe I'm wrong, and Sampson will get 3-down work, and Judkins will get the valuable kind of flashy work, the 3rd-down stuff. But anyways, I really like this draft. I added Shedeur as a gem, even though I don't have him as a gem. I think if Shedeur works out in the NFL, I will be incredibly surprised. I hate him as a prospect. I think he brings the entire wrong personality to the sport of entitlement, and I don't think that works in the NFL unless your name is Antonio Brown. And so, I mean, I don't love the other quarterback they drafted. If they didn't draft quarterback in this draft, I'd probably like it a little better. But everything else they really hit on. The tight end that they drafted is solid. I think they knocked it out of the park, even if Gabriel or Sanders, both quarterbacks, never register a snap for the Browns. I still think it's a good draft. At number 2, we actually have the highest rated in average grade of prospect. It's just that the Falcons have less gems and a lower jump from average pick to average grade of prospect. So I gave the next team the first spot, which you can feel free to disagree with me. But hey, my video. I get to choose the order. But I really liked Atlanta's draft. I really liked Walker. Walker was a top 5 player for me in this class. Pierce Jr., real good edge. I have him as a 9 out of 10 and not a gem. Watts, really liked him. Bowman, really liked him. They really improved their secondary in this draft, which is big. really went defense for all of their picks other than their last one in Nelson, who was a tackle. And I think they got 3 real good potential Pro Bowlers, and then after that, it doesn't really matter. I mean, 3 Pro Bowlers in 1 draft that's success. And finally, at number 1, we have the Carolina Panthers, who literally all 5 of their first picks were gems, in my opinion. They got a potentially elite wide receiver in McMillan, a great D-end in Scourton, another D-end after that, and then Travis Etienne's brother, who, yeah, sure, Trevor Etienne hasn't had the best season this year, a lot of fumble issues and stuff like that, but I don't think you can put him kind of imploding this season on just the family name. He's a great prospect, did well in Georgia, and then they had a safety and another wide receiver, the safety being Ransom, who I had 10, and Jimmy Horn Jr., who was actually their last pick, who I also had at an 11 gem. I really liked their class. I think they brought in 6 potential NFL career players, and the other 2 people that they drafted that weren't gems were rated an 8 and a 9. So I love this class. It's consistent. There are a lot of elite players. Carolina knocked it out of the park. Lastly, I just wanted to conclude by saying that I have put all of my research into a folder in the comment section or the description, and you can go through and see all of my prospect rankings from, I believe, 2022 to on, as that's when I started this project. Just this year, I decided to make it something part of my channel, but going back in, just to give a little context at the end of the video, I started in 2022, and in 2023, both of those draft classes were done from the Chargers' point of view, because I was trying to look at it and see, okay, this is who I want for the Chargers. So there's a little bit of scheme bias in there. There were some guys that I would have rated higher, but they weren't fast wide receivers or something, which is what we needed, and then we drafted Quentin Johnston. So in 2022 and 2023, there's some Chargers bias in there. And then 2024 was the first year where I made a draft class for no bias towards scheme fit, and just was like, this is the type of prospect they are, and this is how good they are in my eyes. And that's what it was this year. But I want to put my track record out there, because this channel is named Cold Takes, and I like having informed opinions. So I want you guys to be able to see the research I put into this, and be able to openly agree or disagree with it. There are some ranks in there that if I go back, I'm like, oh my god, I had Puka Nacua poorly ranked, dang. But hindsight is 2020. If you want to call me dumb for anything, go ahead. If you want to call me brilliant for something, go ahead. But I wanted to put my evidence out there, not my evidence, but my research, and just give some clarifying information onto this project.